began there 3 days earlier. Switchmen from the Michigan Central traveled to freight shops in yards across the city, calling workers out to strike. Soon, lumber shovers, butchers, and industrial workers joined the strike. By the time the battle began, police had already clashed with unarmed strikers twice. Historian Richard Schneveroff describes the scene leading up to the battle. The city was now preparing itself for a full-scale insurrection, even though violent confrontations were rooted in police attacks on non-violent crowds. Previous confrontations centered in the railroad yards. Now, striker actions spilled over into the neighborhood of Pilsen, where they live. Thousands gathered along Halsted Street between 12th and 16th Streets. The police arrived attempting to disperse the crowd. They chased the strikers south and, as Schneveroff describes, emptied their revolvers into the masses of humanity. The crowd pelted the police with stones in defense and chased them over the viaduct. As word spread of the pitched battle, stockyard workers from nearby Bridgeport walked off the job. They marched along Halsted Street with butcher knives in hand to support the strikers under attack. The crowd on Halsted swelled to more than 10,000 as workers continued to battle police. By evening, 30 workers had been shot dead. Hundreds more were seriously wounded. But the strike continued to spread more fiercely. Streetcar stockmen, stone cutters, gas workers, glass cutters, and others joined the strike. The city was shut down for another week until railroad bosses finally rescinded wage cuts. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in. And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in this week on the program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. I want to start off first with this guy who's running for governor in Oklahoma. And I don't know if it's an attention ploy. I don't know if it's mom dropped him on his head when he was a baby. I don't know if he was dressed funny when he went to school. I really don't know what gets this guy who wants to run for governor saying, I'm going to run for governor on the platform of simple. I won't lie to you. I won't sugarcoat anything. I promise 100% transparency. I will not backpedal or flip-flop on any issues. I got to question the flip-flop part because, and again, I'm not sure that this is truly how this person feels, if this is truly the platform on which he is going to run, or if this was hey, I need attention. Hey, I want people to go to my website. Hey, I just want to tick people off. He writes on Facebook, and again, it is what it is. People throw stuff out all the time. It's since been deleted. Fortunately, someone took a screenshot of it. Here's what the gubernatorial candidate in Oklahoma had to say. Yes, I am. I firmly believe we should have assisted suicide in the U.S. I also ask the legitimate question of why should we have to keep up people who cannot contribute to society any longer? He writes, obviously, I'm not saying the government should put these people down. I'm just saying that we shouldn't keep them up. If they can take care of themselves without government assistance, great. If not, let them starve and die. Easy as that. Starve and die fit on a bumper sticker. I wonder if that's the official platform. Now, he's gotten an awful lot of attention. A lot of people are saying, resign, get out of the race, don't do this anymore, and a lot worse. And I've gotten a lot of responses from people going, well, he's just a troll. And I say, the reality is there are people who think this way. There are people who, they're stupid. And I can't come to anything other than that. Mean, self-centered, egotistical, evil. And I had this conversation this week with a couple of listeners about, Rick, you think Republicans are evil? I go, no, I don't think all of them are evil. Some, sure. Some misogynistic, yeah. Some homophobic, some racist, you bet. Some just plain, not bright, okay. Some really intelligent, some really caring. I'm sure there's some. But sadly, the party seems to have been taken over by people like this guy. And I keep coming back to this guy because the scary thing is his ideas, while seeming to be the outlier, seem to be what a lot of Republicans whisper to themselves. It's kind of like, well, you know, when people, you say, well, if we could just get rid of Social Security or Medicare, or if we could just get rid of labor unions, or if we could just, you know, get rid of safety regulations, if we could just do this stuff. And they would whisper to each other in their cloakrooms, and they would devise schemes, and they had their think tanks, and they had their, you know, their state policy networks, and they started all these different groups to try and, you know, gin up anger. You know, the first they had to float the trial balloon, see what kind of outrage they got. I view this as kind of a trial balloon. Granted, by a kook and someone who I think is way off the beaten path, but still the trial balloon that I'm sure that the wealth class would love to be able to do. And I go back to some of those, you know, dystopian novels that I read as a kid. You were like at 35, you know, you'd be euthanized because you were no longer useful. You know, you in the working class. Once you were no longer good for physical labor, we just did away with you. And that's kind of the mindset here. Because I look at what's going on in Louisiana. Right now in Louisiana, the governor has ordered their Department of Health and Human Services to send out letters to 37,000 people saying, hey, the Republicans in the legislature, they're not funding Medicaid. We're not going to have the money. You 37,000 people don't fit every category of our mandate. So start thinking of something else. So you, woman who's a quadriplegic, who has someone come in every day to wash and bathe you and to feed you and to clean your catheters and to do all of those things that take you to your doctor appointments and all those things. Sorry, you're on your own. Because, well, we don't prioritize it. 37,000 people. And you stop and think about this guy. This guy going, well, you know, if she can take care of herself, that quadriplegic woman, good for her. If not, let her starve and die. And then you look to our Department of Health and Human Services. You look at the woman who's running the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, who this week came out and said, you know, we're not going to push the idea of lifetime limits on Medicaid. And I said, wow, the Trump administration actually did something not crazy. Because understand, there are a number of states, Kansas being the leader of them, who want to impose lifetime limits on people getting Medicaid benefits. As I understand it, Kansas, 3 years. Anything over 3 years, never again. And you could throw in Maine and Arizona and Utah and Wisconsin, all wanting to do similar kind of things. And those are just the ones who came forward and said, yeah, we want to punish the poor. And they're starting off with, you know, there are people who they can work. They're starting with them. But you know their inevitable goal is to get right to where this nitwit has said. If they can take care of themselves, great. If not, let them starve and die. And while all of us know someone like this, all of us know someone who has spouted this kind of ridiculous nonsense, all of us know someone who claimed to be good, God-fearing Christians, but then talk in those terms, they're not running for governor. They're not going to get votes. They're not sitting in governor's mansions in Kansas or Utah or Arizona or Maine or Wisconsin. But we have these people, and this is the thing that's very, very scary to me, that we have people who are willing to say, you know what? Sorry, you're unlucky. Sorry, you got sick. You're on your own. Sorry, you're broke. Pay or die. And I come back to this, and I guess it's because, you know, when I grew up, my mother worked in a nursing home for for a number of years. And I remember seeing those people, the forgotten, the left behind, the left out, the unlucky, who were warehoused in in like a county home. And I remember, their stories of, working hard lives, their bodies broken and beaten and having nowhere to go. The future, I fear, is a return to warehousing those people. One, or two, putting them on the curb to die. Because I go back to Louisiana. Those 37,000 people who are receiving this letter, where do they go? Where does the quadriplegic woman go? How does she take care of herself? And as a society, are we willing to say, if you can take care of yourself, great. If not, starve and die? Are we? I sure hope not. And this idea that we're going to leave it to charity will take care of it, is even more ridiculous. Because sadly, they never have. They've never been able to keep up with the need or the demand. The only organization able to do that is government. A government of, for, and by we the people. And as I've said a number of times, our government does the things that we individually cannot, but we can collectively. And making sure that people don't starve and die should be right there at the top. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Feel free to bring the crazy. I want to hear, are there people really out there who believe this, who would vote for Chris Barnett? Are there people who would vote for this guy for governor? Want to know it. So it's up to you, Oklahoma. Let's hear. Quick break. Right back. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So, big primary elections this week in Pennsylvania as, turned another House seat from red to blue in the House 178th. A good sign there. A historic number of women running for congressional seats. Great stuff there. But on the other side, baby Trump, Scott Wagner won the Republican votes to run against Governor Wolf in November, which scares me on so many levels. And as I say, if you don't know Scott Wagner, he's baby Trump without the charisma or the Twitter account, which is why I've asked Tom Perez, chairman of the DNC, to come talk to us about elections this week and where we need to be going here in the coming weeks and months. Tom, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's always a pleasure to be with you and your listeners.
So what do you think? Flipped another seat from red to blue.
I was excited about that. As you know, that seat has been in Republican hands for about 35 years. We were phone banking on behalf of Helen here at the DNC because our new mission is to help elect Democrats from the school board to the Oval Office. And we've now flipped over 40 seats in state legislatures, Rick. And we're doing it by fielding good candidates, by organizing, and by leading with our values. And when I look back this week at what happened in Pennsylvania, you see dramatic increases in turnout. In 2014, they cleaned our clock. We've got to be honest about that on the turnout front and on the electoral front. This year, we saw about 100,000 more Democrats turn out than Republicans. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and so I was about 90 minutes from Erie. And in 2016, Donald Trump and others did very well, as you know, in Erie. And you look yesterday, more Democrats turned out there. You mentioned women, and it's remarkable to me that the 18-member delegation to the House in Pennsylvania is all men. Well, we've got 7 women now on the ballot in November in House seats. This is the year of the woman. We started 2018 holding 5 out of the 18 seats. And we have an opportunity, if we continue to organize and continue to stay focused and continue to focus on the core issues of good jobs, the right to form a union, pension security, healthcare security. When we keep talking about those issues, which are the issues that keep people up at night, we have a chance to go from 5 out of 18 to 13 out of 18. We can flip this, but it's going to be a lot of work. We got to make sure we have Tom Wolf reelected at the top of the ticket. Your point early on, Rick, was spot on. Tom is indispensable to our continuing movement forward. So is Bob Casey. But I tell you, I'm confident that we can do this because the energy is everywhere. And one of the lessons we have learned is that we've got to organize in every single community. So we have an every county strategy and every zip code strategy. And that's how we're going to continue this momentum.
No, it's extremely important. And, you know, for the first time in my memory, it appears that almost every House and state Senate seat, there's a competitive race going on. And you know, there was a lot of time where that wasn't the truth.
Well, I'll tell you, Rick, I think everybody learned a lesson from Virginia. I still coach my 15-year-old in basketball. There's a term we use in basketball. We call it flooding the zone. And that's what they did in Virginia. They fielded candidates for almost every House of Delegates seat. And not only did they field candidates, they fielded really good candidates, and they made historic gains. So you see in Pennsylvania, a tremendous number of candidates, not only in those congressional seats that we discussed, but for these state house seats, state legislature, state senate, places like that. Those down ballot races are so critically important to the long-term success of the Democratic Party. I mean, I know a guy who was a state senator in 2004 and became president of the United States 4 years later. That's why the new DNC is about electing Democrats up and down the ticket, because we've got to build that bench. We've got to understand that you talk about right to work. In order to make sure right to work never, ever happens in Pennsylvania, we've got to elect more Democrats in the state house. And we've got to make sure we reelect Governor Wolf. And that is why we're working everywhere. We're working with our partners. We were proud to work on behalf of Connor Lamb when he won his earlier race. Even though he's running against an incumbent right now, I'm confident that Connor can win because he's an authentic leader and he speaks to the bread and butter issues that people want progress on.
You know, it's interesting you brought up Connor Lamb because I thought he ran a fantastic campaign. In fact, didn't really mention Donald Trump once. But what's interesting to me is the right wing is framing this entire election season as you and other Democrats only have the anti-Trump movement to hold you together as glue. How do you break through that?
By leading with our values. I mean, Connor talked about 3 issues, as you know. He talked about, healthcare. He talked about pension security, and he talked about the right to form a union and the need to strengthen the union movement. Those are FDR Democratic issues. And you know what? When you continue to talk like that and talk about those issues, that's how we win. And I was so proud to have invested in Connor's race, Rick, because it was such an important issue. And we won in Virginia because Ralph Northam at the top of the ticket was talking about healthcare. Healthcare is the #1 issue in this country. And Democrats believe that healthcare should be a right for all and not a privilege for a few. And the other side believes exactly the opposite. We think that prosperity should be shared, not just prosperity for the oligarchs at the top, but prosperity for everyone. If you work a full-time job, you ought to be able to live a stress-free life. And income inequality is one of the defining issues of our time. We're fighting for better wages. I was proud to be your labor secretary, fighting to make sure that if you went in a coal mine, that air that you breathed wasn't going to kill you. If you were working on a construction site, silica dust wasn't going to get into your lungs. If you worked a full-time job, you were going to get a fair wage. Those were the things I fought for as labor secretary. Those are the things Democrats are fighting for every day, a brighter future for everyone. And that's why we're going to win.
And I got to tell you, I miss you as labor secretary, just to throw that out, because everything that you just laid out there, and it's not pandering, everything you just laid out, this administration is undoing. We're going to be sending kids back into factories, into coal mines, because they're pushing back on the hazardous occupation orders. There was just a story last week of how we're going to put 16-year-olds into factories making dynamite. I mean, it's crazy what they've done, doing away with, safety rules and the Chemical Safety Board and all of this stuff that, people died to get. They're just kind of moving away from.
It breaks my heart, but it also motivates me to no end, Rick. I spent a lot of time down in Greene County, and I spent a lot of time a mile or so below ground with coal miners. That's hard work. And I made a promise to them that I was always going to make sure that we had your back, whether it was your pension security or whether it was your workplace safety. And I'm proud to have worked hard on that. We're proud to have put in place one of the most important worker protection regulations that we've seen at the Labor Department on behalf of coal miners, and then separately with silica dust on behalf of construction workers. You should have a fundamental right when you go to work in the morning to come home safe at night. I met way too many coal miners who were retired who weren't going to see their grandchildren grow up because they already have silicosis. That's unconscionable, and that's preventable. And the reason I'm working so hard to elect people like Connor Lamb and Tom Wolf and Bob Casey and others is because they understand that. They're fighting for everyday Pennsylvanians. You look at Barletta and Wagner. They're just fighting so that we can take away health care. They are far, far to the right of what Pennsylvanians believe. And that is why we've got to work hard and we've got to organize everywhere. We took too many voters for granted, Rick. We're never doing that again. The new DNC organizes everywhere. We are fighting hard for the right to form a union and the right to maintain a union. And we have to understand that the other side has it out for us because they believe if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yep.
And they want us to be on the menu. That ain't going to happen. We're fighting like heck and we're winning. And Pennsylvania can be ground zero in our efforts to take back democracy. Think about this. We need 24 seats to take over the United States House of Representatives. And we can get 7 of them from Pennsylvania if we work hard and continue to lead with our values. That's amazing. At the end of the year, Pennsylvania can be a ground zero in our successful efforts to regain and retake our democracy.
No, I'm right there with you. Last line of questioning I've got for you, because, one of the things that I keep saying on our radio program is that the Republicans are trying to undo the New Deal, really undo the 20th century and move us back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s and not the 1980s and 90s. Bernie Sanders just came out with the Workplace Democracy Act. Is this something that you guys are going to move front and center? Because I've been saying for years what we need to do is we need to repeal Taft-Hartley and move back to the original intent of the NLRA and give workers the right to sign up and join up and negotiate and get that first contract. Is this going to be a central tenet, do you think?
Workers have to be a centerpiece of everything we do as Democrats, and things like card check that I was strongly supportive of. We've got to make sure that we are working together with workers. We need a 21st century National Labor Relations Act that enables workers, that has as its North Star the right to organize, that understands and takes a page from what other countries do. I've spent a lot of time in Germany where works councils gave workers a seat at the table, not just on wages and benefits, but on governance issues. And when we think about ways that really empower workers and give them a voice at the table, that's not simply good for workers. It's good for business, and it's good for the middle class. When you look at the history of the 20th century, income inequality was at its lowest, Rick, when labor union density was at its highest. And the Republicans know that because they've studied it, and they want to reverse that. They think that the Gilded Age was a golden age. I don't think it was. I think it was a terrible time for people going to work in factories that were chronically. That is why in the 21st century, the Democratic Party is at the forefront of making sure we build a new social compact so that you don't have to make a choice between your family and your job because you have a right to paid leave. We're the only industrialized nation on the planet that doesn't have some form of paid leave. We've got to improve that. We've got to raise our minimum wage. We've got to make sure that if you can't afford to get higher education, whether it's an apprenticeship or whether it's community college, that you can get access to that. You shouldn't have to win the lottery to get more education. And those are the tenets of the Democratic Party. Those are the things I fought for my entire life. And those are the things we're going to fight for when we take back the House and take back the Senate.
Good stuff, Tom. Return to that phrase that I grew up with. If you work hard, you play by the rules, you got ahead. Good stuff, Tom. I appreciate the time.
Always a pleasure, Rick. Thank you, and all your listeners. Let's keep the fight up. We've got can't take any weekends off here between now and November.
Good stuff. Tom Perez, chairman of the Democratic National Committee. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Excited about November? I know I am. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. That was the day striking railroad workers in Chicago clashed with police in the Battle of the Halsted Street Viaduct. The Great Railroad Strike had reached the nation's railroad hub and began there 3 days earlier. Switchmen from the Michigan Central traveled to freight shops in yards across the city, calling workers out to strike. Soon, lumber shovers, butchers, and industrial workers joined the strike. By the time the battle began, police had already clashed with unarmed strikers twice. Historian Richard Schneveroff describes the scene leading up to the battle. The city was now preparing itself for a full-scale insurrection, even though violent confrontations were rooted in police attacks on non-violent crowds. Previous confrontations centered in the railroad yards. Now, striker actions spilled over into the neighborhood of Pilsen, where they live. Thousands gathered along Halsted Street between 12th and 16th Streets. The police arrived attempting to disperse the crowd. They chased the strikers south and, as Schneveroff describes, emptied their revolvers into the masses of humanity. The crowd pelted the police with stones in defense and chased them over the viaduct. As word spread of the pitched battle, stockyard workers from nearby Bridgeport walked off the job. They marched along Halsted Street with butcher knives in hand to support the strikers under attack. The crowd on Halsted swelled to more than 10,000 as workers continued to battle police. By evening, 30 workers had been shot dead. Hundreds more were seriously wounded. But the strike continued to spread more fiercely. Streetcar stockmen, stone cutters, gas workers, glass cutters, and others joined the strike. The city was shut down for another week until railroad bosses finally rescinded wage cuts. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So, we're going to make child labor great again. Evidently, that's the goal of the Trump administration. There was a Bloomberg Law story last week that caught my attention that evidently we're going to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to use hazardous tools. And the frame that they used, and I thought was interesting, that you need to be 18 to buy fireworks, but under this idea that the Trump administration is pushing forward, 16-year-olds will be able to work in dynamite factories. I mean, it's pretty remarkable when you stop and you think about all the advancements that we've made as a country, all the steps forward, all of the ideas of, we don't want kids working in the mines. We don't want them, dealing with hazardous materials and stuff like that because, they're young. We need to train them, but not go. None of that. Not back to the days of the Breaker Boys or any of the history of the labor in this country with children. No, we don't want to do that until now, because evidently we've been coddling the children. We've been coddling the children too much, and now we want the kids, you know what? If they're going to flunk out of school, if they're going to be terrible, on with your life of toil and misery and working in horrible conditions. I just don't know. But according to Bloomberg Law, they say that the Department of Labor plans to unwind decades-old youth labor protections by allowing teenagers, obviously, to work longer hours under some conditions, some of the most hazardous conditions in the country as well. They gave some places where kids can I guess soon be able to work. They'll be able to run meat slicers. So in the back of the meat counter, we'll have a kid with a couple of fingers missing. That's all right. It's okay. They'll be able to do the bulk trash compactor, the balers. They can make explosives, work in coal mines, work with woodworking and metal stamping tools, work with radioactive materials. Because, hey, what's a better look for a teenager than glowing? They can work slaughtering cattle. They can work slaughtering hogs. They can work slaughtering poultry because, they got smaller hands. They haven't really developed yet. And, good, strong, young hands to do that work. They can operate circular saws, bandsaws, chainsaws, reciprocating saws, wood chippers, and something that they say is a guillotine shears, which I actually know what those are. All things that can take your fingers off or an arm. But, the thing is they're arguing that, kids are going to need to learn this stuff anyway, so why not start earlier? And I've always been in the mindset of, why not wait a little bit till they're mature and end up doing dumb things with them? But it comes back to this thought process. And there are some in this country, much like the guy, let them starve and die, that, don't care about others. Not at all. And, immediately as I'm reading through this story, I'm thinking about, how exactly do we protect workers in this country? And the reality is we're not. This administration has no intention of protecting workers. In fact, they've got this regulation cutting fetish. Because we keep hearing about job killing regulations. Well, I keep asking about, what about, the people killing lack of regulation? What about the people killing lack of protection? And what's interesting is the administration believes that the industries will police themselves. And this is a very Republican, this is a very corporate idea that somehow the industries will act in their own best interest and they won't allow the children to be harmed. And you go, we've seen this movie before, and it never quite turns out the way it's planned. And it's one of these moments where I think we as a working class have to really wake up to the reality that, I'm sorry, the idea of the benevolent employer doesn't exist. And I've gone through this for years with people about, well, you know what? They work in union shops, they get good wages, good health care benefits, good pensions, and they think that the employer gave that to them without thinking about the generations before them that fought, bled, and died for those benefits. And I know there are people who say, no, I worked hard for that. No. And the sad reality is we're giving back all of those things that my grandparents' generation fought for. The 8-hour day being one of them. People literally died for the right to have an 8-hour day. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. That was the battle cry through the 1880s. The idea that the workday being sun up to sun down 6 days a week, sometimes 7, should not be the norm. That life was more than just work. That you didn't live to work, you worked to live. And the union movement brought that forward. And they built a 40-hour work week. They brought in vacations and weekends and sick time and a voice in the conditions, a say on what happens on the job, some dignity, some respect. They got health care, they got pensions, they got part of the wealth that the labor of this world created. And yet here we are right now. Donald Trump running around saying, most prosperous businesses ever. Companies doing wildly well. In fact, $1 trillion this year evidently is going to go to shareholders. See, that used to be wealth that was divvied up amongst the working class. That used to be money that went to higher wages, better benefits, better working conditions. It used to be when we had strong unions, when we had someone who sat across the table from the boss and said, wait a second, you're taking 10, 12, 20, $100 million, and yet you're not going to give our workers a nickel or a dime raise? Explain that. See, they don't have to do that anymore, which is why CEO salaries and executive salaries are so far off the charts. Understand, in the 1960s, the average CEO to worker ratio was 20 to 1. 20 to 1. Now it's somewhere in the range of 300 to 1. And in some places, thousands to 1 because of just how completely out of control CEO salaries have gotten. And how do we pay those salaries? By lower wages, by less health care, by no pension, by poor working conditions, cutting corners. How do we fill the investor class? How do we fill the shareholders' pockets? Again, lower wages, less health care, no pension, unsafe working conditions, cutting corners, cheap products. Workers having absolutely no say in what happens. And what's amazing to me, and I keep coming back to this because I have these conversations all the time with unorganized workers who say, well, we have a say on the job. I go, do you really? Can you be fired tomorrow for no reason? And the answer is always yes. To me, the idea of being part of a union is having a say in what you do, having some control over your work environment, having some control over your wages, hours, conditions, having some security. And for me, I remember, 2008, President Obama ran on the idea that, look, we're going to pass the Employee Free Choice Act. Something that I said at the time was a step in the right direction, much like the ACA, not the answer, but a step toward the answer. It did a couple of things. It brought in a card check system to where if you had a number of people who signed the cards, you could either have an election or not. You could move right into negotiation. It guaranteed a first contract within a year, and it tripled the fines and fees that an employer guilty of unfair labor practices would have to pay. 3 simple things. And thought it would sail right on through. It did not. And I think that was one of the great failures of the Obama administration. And I've had this argument 1,000 times of I thought something better than the Employee Free Choice Act should have been in place of the Lilly Ledbetter Act. But we can debate that till the cows come home. So now you have Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has come forth with the Workplace Democracy Act, something that does a lot of what the Employee Free Choice Act did. It established a card check recognition to where if you get the majority of cards, like the original National Labor Relations Act, you got a majority of people signed up on the cards, you begin negotiating. That union is the bargaining unit, and you begin negotiating that first contract. Now, the Workplace Democracy Act is saying, you know what? Once that happens, once you have established the number of cards needed, the votes needed, you begin negotiating. If in 45 days you don't have a contract, you don't have a collective bargaining agreement, the union has the right to go to binding arbitration. Now, the idea of this is, interestingly enough, that neither side will want to go to binding arbitration because who knows what you get. So it's best to sit down, hammer it out, come to an agreement, because it's what we want. We want government out of our lives. We want private interests having their private conversations, coming up with their private deals, coming up with their contracts. This is the best scenario. It also does what the Employee Free Choice Act would have done, and that is imposed 3 times the fines on an employer if they fire someone or cause harm economically to someone because of an unfair labor practice. Currently, the law is if an employer fires you for a union organizing campaign and you go get a job making the exact same amount of money and you actually lose no money because you did find another job, there's no penalty to the employer because they don't have to pay you anything back. Now, if you didn't find a job, they'd have to pay your salary. But very few people can last 6 months, a year for the whole process to happen and not have any money coming in. And employers know this. There's really no downside for them to fire somebody. There are no fines. The Workplace Democracy Act also throws in a $10,000 minimum fine for anyone willfully violating the law. I think that's a step in the right direction. I think it's important. This way we keep people honest, we keep people on task, we keep people moving in the right direction. Also, what it does is it basically repeals Taft-Hartley, something I've said should have happened years ago. The Democrats should have been on board with this from day one, should have been pushing hard for it. I'm all in favor of repealing Taft-Hartley and giving workers the ability to strike, ending the prohibition on secondary boycotts and boycotting and strikes and really putting the power back into the hands of workers and employers to come to an agreement. Understand, we have seen stagnant wages for 40 years for a reason. And that reason is massive redistribution of wealth from the people who work and create it with the sweat of their brow, the ache of their back, and then the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into it to investors who, move money from one pocket to another. Yes, I understand there's a need for investors, but they shouldn't get all of the gains. Also, it would put a preemption in states putting out any preemption laws. It would say that the federal law is the law. Every state, every worker in every area should be protected the same. This is important because what we've been seeing since the beggar thy neighbor Taft-Hartley era, states push right-to-work laws, and what do we hear from them? Well, if we pass right-to-work laws, we can steal jobs from the neighbors. Because why? Well, because we're going to get lower wages, lower health care benefits, lower pension rates, higher unsafe work conditions. All the negative things are what they're selling their people, but we can get those jobs or we can steal them. And, of course, make them worse for everyone else around. And it's just, it's part of all of this no rights at work agenda that the right's been pushing and spending tons of money on. So for me to see Sanders and Mark Pocan come forth with this and say, look, this is a step in the right direction, and to hear someone like Tom Perez saying, yeah, this is what we need to be doing, gives me hope that we can rebuild that most prosperous working class that we once had, that we can return that ideal of work hard, play by the rules, and get ahead to our economy. And it starts with, for me, it starts with this. So I would suggest anytime you talk to a candidate, any question you ask, especially for federal office, where do you stand on the Workplace Democracy Act? Do you support a worker's right to choose a union? Do you support the right of workers to join and form and to collectively bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions? To me, that's simple. And if they say no, they're not worth your vote. Not even a little bit. Love to hear your thoughts. Please share. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Do you support the idea of the Workplace Democracy Act, or would you like the
auditor? Let's use every tool in our toolbox to knock down Donald Trump's hateful and wasteful wall.
Speaking of walls, we invest $24 billion of our money on Wall Street. Let's take some of that money and invest it in education for all of our kids.
I'm Bill McCamley. In the Trump era, we need a Democratic auditor who's going to build bridges, not walls.
What a great video. I got to tell you, what I love about election season is the creativity that you see in some of these videos, especially today where everyone has to have a video. Some of the stories that come out, some of the directions that they take. I got to tell you, that's one of my favorites. We're going to knock down the wall. And to be honest, I love the idea of the next generation saying, you know what, if you build it, we're just going to tear it down. I love that idea. But here's a thought. How about we just stop it from being built right from the beginning? Do some rational things, maybe go along that thought process, which is why I've asked the star of the video, New Mexico State Representative Bill McCamley, to come talk with us. Bill, thanks for taking time for it.
Thanks for having me, Rick. I appreciate it.
So what gave you the idea of this video? I mean, and great job, by the way.
So I actually live 40 miles from the border. I live in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is very near El Paso, Texas, and very near Juarez, Mexico. So when they're building that wall, it is something that directly impacts the people that live here in a number of different ways. But the biggest issue, and I know people ask me this question, I'm running for state auditor. What the hell does the state auditor have to do with the wall? And the thing about that wall is Trump has estimated it's going to cost $18 billion with a B, dollars to build that thing. How we spend our tax money in this country and in our communities, these are moral decisions. And I'll give you an example. Just late last week, Trump decided that he wanted to cut the federal budget, including the children's health insurance program, by $16 billion. We don't live in a land of magic and unicorns and rainbows. That money doesn't appear from nowhere. If you're spending the money on a wall, and you're taking it away from children. 15,000 kids in my state, New Mexico, rely on that children's health insurance program for their health care. You're making a decision to say we are favoring this monument to hatred, this monument to anger over children's health. And that is exactly the wrong decision. And that's the sort of thing that an office like mine, if I'm elected as state auditor, can really start pointing out what are the financial consequences to these actions. And we need to be doing that.
No, I'm right there with you. And it's ironic to me that, those numbers seem to align so perfectly. It's almost like they kind of thought it out.
Well, the bigger issue for me is, you remember when they tried to screw over healthcare last year and they tried to take away all the Medicaid money? 72% of babies born in my state, New Mexico, we lead the nation, are born with Medicaid funding. And it's actually been a lifesaver because I used to be on a county commission 10 years ago before Obamacare. And we had all these women that would go into emergency rooms to have their kids. But with Medicaid coming out, they've actually been able to get health care before the birthing process. The process goes a lot better. They get postnatal care for their kids. It's been a huge lifesaver. And that's the thing. If you call yourself pro-life and you're choosing to cut children's health insurance and you're choosing to cut Medicaid, which helps babies be born in a safe environment, and you want to put a wall up, I think you better take a look in the mirror because I think you're wrong.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And you hit on a point that I've brought up a number of times. You've got these people who, we love the children, except when they're born, which is just kind of bizarre to me. I mean, if you're gonna claim that Christian nation status, you're gonna put that flag in the ground, you should at least, you should at least adhere to the basic tenets of Christianity.
Well, and the thing that makes my blood boil a little bit about this, frankly, is that we had these nuns on a bus. I don't know if you remember those guys from a couple of years ago.
Simone Campbell.
Yeah, they stopped in my town and they gave this speech. I was like, look, if you make all your big deals about abortion and, you want to make sure that these kids are being born, but you're not going to make sure people have education. You're not going to make sure they have health care. You're not going to make sure they have basic supports. You're not pro-life. You're pro-birth. And once again, this all goes back to the money. It all goes back to how we spend our very finite resources. If we're not out there saying, what are we going to do to actually make our communities better? What are we going to do to actually help people? And we're going to take that money instead spend it on a stupid ass wall, which isn't going to do anything, and it's trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. I don't know what to tell you. It's just morally the wrong thing to do.
Right. Well, let me ask you about that because you say there's not a problem there. I hear from the president, ad nauseum, and I hear from the radical right that there's a streamline of illegals and there's a caravan of illegals and they're rushing the border so porous and they're all just they're just all coming across the border and there's no guards, there's nothing there. We need this wall to stop this intrusion, this invasion of our country, Bill.
Well, they're wrong. They don't live here. And I'll tell you, look at the numbers. We have the lowest amount of people that are coming over illegally since like the 70s. When you look at the actual safety on the border, El Paso, Texas has the second lowest homicide rate in the country. San Diego has the third lowest homicide rate in the country. The only city with lower homicide rate is Honolulu, Hawaii. So in terms of the continental 48 states, El Paso and San Diego are some of the safest places to be in the country. And guess where they are? Right on the border. Furthermore, even if you wanted to say we're going to build this wall, it wouldn't work. What does work? Drones work. A few more people maybe work, but electronic measures work. And if you're going to talk about drug smuggling and human smuggling, those guys come through border checkpoints anyway for the most part. What do you want to do? Beef up the security at those border checkpoints and customs services. All that takes a lot less than $18 billion is a hell of a lot more effective. So you can actually be more effective and siphon more money to kids and broadband and workforce training, all the things that actually helps an economy work. But that's not what this is about. Once again, Rick, what we're talking about here is a guy who wants to feed off of people's anger and hatred and build the wall becomes this symbol for a lot bigger thing. Unfortunately, that symbol is going to take a lot of money from things that actually work and put it to some stupid ass thing that doesn't. And that's what we all have to really fight against.
No, I'm right there with you. But, the message is, all these people streaming across, and you hit on it. Most of the people who come here and are here in an undocumented fashion are basically people who overstayed their visas.
Yeah.
They came in the right way, and then they just overstayed, and we don't have the manpower to go and control that. And now we should be doing some of that stuff, because I don't think you're saying we should have porous borders and people pouring in and open door policies, right?
No, and what we need is for Congress to get off their asses and do comprehensive. Look, if you want to come here and you want to work hard and you want to follow the rules and pay your taxes and all that kind of stuff, you should be able to do so. And furthermore, let me just say this, because I know this situation. And yesterday we heard that the Trump administration wants to rip families apart of these folks that are coming up and put kids in military bases, basically put them in internment camps. And that just, I don't know how to express how angry that makes me, because we've done that before with Native Americans, with reservations. We did it with the Japanese during World War II. This is not who we're supposed to be. And every single time we've done this, we've looked back and say, what the hell were we doing? And I will say the other thing, that caravan that they talk about, those people are leaving Honduras and El Salvador and Nicaragua. These are some of the most dangerous places in the country. These people are fleeing cartels who basically tell families, your sons will either join us in the cartel or we will shoot them. That's what they're fleeing. And so for everyone out there saying, oh God, these people are coming up that are trying to invade us. No, they're trying to get to a safe situation. And I would ask you, if you were in a situation like that, what would you do? And I think most people, if they put themselves in those folks' shoes, they would make the decision to try to come here and be safe. And who are we? If we as a country are saying, we're going to turn you away, or if you get here, we're going to rip you apart from your parents and your kids, and we're going to put the kids on military bases, basically put them in internment camps. What does that make us? It makes us less. It makes us not a country with basic human morals. And I think we got to get away from that, man.
No, I'm with you. I mean, the wall itself is that symbol of everything that is wrong with the mindset that you just kind of laid out here. But let me ask you the other side of this, because there are people saying, well, you know what? We didn't cause the problem. Why should we have to pay for all of the people that come here? And look, I don't know what the answer to our immigration troubles are, but you're right. If I were on the southern end of the border, and I've said this a million times, it wouldn't be a thought. I'd be here already.
Let me say two things. First of all, a lot of these folks coming in, there are economic opportunities for them. I mean, many of these folks come in, they're migrant farm laborers, and there are crops rotting in the field right now. The second thing is, if this was such a huge problem and people were so worried about it, why the hell are we not putting the people that hire those folks in jail? You hardly ever see that. It's not about the corporations. It's about forcing hate and anger on these poor people that are coming here to try to make life better. If they honestly thought this was a problem, basic supply and demand, right? They would jail anyone hiring these folks. They never do that. The third thing I'll say is this. My last name is McCamley, and I did a bunch of research on this. The Irish in the 1800s, the rhetoric and the actions that were against the Irish are the exact same things that we're saying now. So if you have a last name that begins with O or an MC, and your family came here after the potato famine in the 1800s, I would say, and you're against these other folks coming in, what is it? Slam the doors, roll up the highway that you're here now? Look back and realize that your ancestors were treated in the exact same way, and have some thought about, okay, that probably wasn't the right thing to do. I want to try to do the right thing now.
Yeah, but Bill, I mean, I've had this argument with people in the past, and they say, well, my ancestors came here the right way. I'm sure you've heard that.
Okay. When the Irish came here in the 1800s, you know how long it took to get through Ellis Island? Like 3 hours. You came here, you got a basic tuberculosis check, you signed your name off of something, and you're done. You know how long it takes someone to now? It takes like 11 years to get a green card. And if they're here in an undocumented manner, they've got to go back to their home country first. And if your home country is a place where they want to shoot you, maybe that's not something you want to do. That's why we need real immigration reform, because the laws now and the laws then are completely and utterly different. And we've got to bring some sanity back to our immigration laws.
So how does a state auditor get involved in all of that? Back to the video, which again, fantastic video. How do we get you elected as state auditor, and how do you change that?
So I would say, once again, a lot of this goes back to the dollars, because dollars are moral decisions. How we spend our money and our budgets is a moral decision. And one of the things I can do as auditor is say, okay, if you're going to build this wall, New Mexico has about 10% of the land along the border with Mexico. If you gave us $2 billion, which is about 10% of what they're talking about with the wall, we could actually have early childhood education for every single 3- and 4-year-old in my state for a decade. That's the sort of thing that the state auditor is supposed to do. We're supposed to say, you're going to spend your money on this versus you're going to spend your money on this. How do we decide which is which? And I can actually bring that kind of message to Washington and say, you're hurting insurance for kids, you're hurting Medicaid for kids, you could be doing this sort of thing, but instead you're choosing to do this. That's the sort of thing I can bring on the national level. If people are interested in that sort of thing, my website is billmccamley.com. I have a website on, or a giving website on there. If you have $5 or $10 or $5,000 you want to contribute, I should really use the help. But this is the kind of message. We all have a part to play. We are all in this together, fighting the Trump administration, and this is the part that I can play.
So basically what you're going to be is Bill McCamley, moral compass.
That's exactly the job of an auditor. If the job of the auditor is to say, we're going to research and we're going to find out all the ways we're spending our money and find out where we could be doing better, that's what I want to do. And if everyone in every single state would pick their lanes and pick their spots and figure out what they would be good at and what they could bring out, that's how we fight Trump, and that's how we get better. It just doesn't happen from the president. It happens in every single community in every single state, and that's what I'm working to be a part of.
Good stuff. As I always say, you want to change the world, start in your little corner of it. It sounds like you've got some great ideas. Hope people will check out your website, billmccamley.com. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com Bill, good on you. Great video. Best of luck to you, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Rick, thanks a ton for having me on, man. I hope everyone has a great day.
Good stuff, Bill McCamley. And again, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you like the video, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. A quick break. Right back. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Last week's program, lots of responses from folks identifying with the fact that wage theft is rampant in the food service industry, sexual harassment, something that every woman has to deal with, and lots of well wishes, to be honest. And I want to thank everyone for that. We've been trying to figure out how to balance this and how my daughter moves forward in her chosen path, which is she wants to be a chef. And as we talked about last week, the incidents that have happened recently have really brought to her 15-year-old mind that this stuff is real. And also the sense of empowerment that she can change it. And some of the stories that I did share with listeners with her saying, this is what, these folks had gone through. This is what they look back and wish they could have done. And, a couple of the stories were heartbreaking. Single mothers, having to deal with, the kind of harassment and the kind of intimidation just to make sure they got enough hours to put food on the table. College students who, were constantly harassed by customers and by management, knowing that they needed those few hours at that time to be able to, make ends meet. Just tons, so too many stories to go through, but thank you for sharing them. It's important that we talk about this. It's important that it comes to light and that people understand. Now, there were some folks who said, look, I worked in the restaurant industry years, never anything ever happened to me. And you know what? Good for you. I wish that story were universal. I wish everyone shared that. And at some point, and this is what, I talked about with my daughter, at some point the goal is that for everyone. I even had a couple employers reach out and say, you know what, we would never do any of that stuff. And here are our policies. We pay the minimum wage as a matter of fact, not the tipped minimum wage, but an actual minimum wage. Plus they get their tips. And you know what? For those employers, good on you. And you should be promoting that so customers like me can go and patronize your business because you're one of the good players in this. And we should be rewarding the good actors and also punishing the bad ones. A lot of the advice I got was, very alpha male-ish. I got a lot of guys going, you should go and sit with her, Rick, go and, you know where that goes. And I appreciate that. I do. At the end of the day, though, it's about empowering my daughter. It's about empowering that generation to say, you know what, there are things that we can change and we must change them. And I've been saying that for a while now. This coming generation has me really very excited. And I know a bunch of people say, well, Rick, this is what the baby boom generation was supposed to take care of. And if you think about it, they did break down a lot of the barriers and a lot of the stereotypes and a lot of the problems of their generation. It's now time for this generation to pick up the mantle and move forward and do the things that we all think are right and that we all think are best. And I'll be honest, as I said, I'm looking forward to how they're going to change this world for the better. And as I've said, a million times, you want to change the world, start in your little corner of it. And this is the conversation I had with my daughter. You change that behavior one table at a time, one customer at a time. And if you push back, maybe they stop. And if they don't stop, maybe they don't get served. To me, it's just that simple. But thank you for all of your kind responses, your good words, and all of the advice and all of the stories that you shared. Invaluable. Thank you so much. If you've got questions, you've got comments, stories that you want to share, I would love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally and love the back and forth. So thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for your time. Again, really, really great stuff. If you missed today's program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you can go to grab the audio and the video, everything right there. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. That was the day striking railroad workers in Chicago clashed with police in the Battle of the Halsted Street Viaduct. The Great Railroad Strike had reached the nation's railroad hub and began there 3 days earlier. Switchmen from the Michigan Central traveled to freight shops in yards across the city, calling workers out to strike. Soon, lumber shovers, butchers, and industrial workers joined the strike. By the time the battle began, police had already clashed with unarmed strikers twice. Historian Richard Schneveroff describes the scene leading up to the battle. The city was now preparing itself for a full-scale insurrection, even though violent confrontations were rooted in police attacks on non-violent crowds. Previous confrontations centered in the railroad yards. Now, striker actions spilled over into the neighborhood of Pilsen, where they live. Thousands gathered along Halsted Street between 12th and 16th Streets. The police arrived attempting to disperse the crowd. They chased the strikers south and, as Schneveroff describes, emptied their revolvers into the masses of humanity. The crowd pelted the police with stones in defense and chased them over the viaduct. As word spread of the pitched battle, stockyard workers from nearby Bridgeport walked off the job. They marched along Halsted Street with butcher knives in hand to support the strikers under attack. The crowd on Halsted swelled to more than 10,000 as workers continued to battle police. By evening, 30 workers had been shot dead. Hundreds more were seriously wounded. But the strike continued to spread more fiercely. Streetcar stockmen, stone cutters, gas workers, glass cutters, and others joined the strike. The city was shut down for another week until railroad bosses finally rescinded wage cuts. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in. And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Evidently, it appears that the Supreme Court of the United States, well, they're making sexual harassment, gender discrimination, age discrimination, race discrimination, and wage theft great again. And who thought that our Supreme Court would be doing such a thing? Well, I did. And I'm not sure, I've got to be honest, I'm not sure if most Trump voters went to the polls. I'm not sure if they truly understood that the Make America Great March was marching us back in time to a really horrible period for workers. I got to tell you, I understood it. And to be honest, talked about it extensively during the 2016 campaign. This idea that they were moving us back and are moving us back to the Gilded Age, where the billionaire class ruled the roost, and you and me, the working people, well, we either knew our place or we got blackballed. And the thing is, the stories I've heard over the years, the stories that I've read of the great old days were apparently, which we're going back to, is not a pleasant place for us, not a good place for workers or their families at all. And I often tell the horrible stories of child labor. The breaker boys losing fingers and hands and their feet. The trapper boys, young as 8 years old, being killed down in the mine because, well, they didn't hear the cart rolling toward the door. Or the young girls, some as young as 10 or 12 years old, in the looms, spitting up blood from the fabric fibers that filled the air. This is our history. And sadly, we're returning to a time where, well, we had a bloody and deadly past. A bloody and deadly past that corporate America is, well, gleefully welcoming. The corporatist politicians and the right-wing screed of freedom and liberty, well, we're coming back to that. And understand, they're using their enormous wealth, the enormous wealth that you and I create, to usher in this new era of anti-worker sentiment and no rights. Welcome back to the future, fellow workers. A future where working people will be, well, disposable. And we see it already. And while we probably won't see the absolute worst abuses of the era, anytime in the near future. The horrible stuff may not be immediate. The reality is we're on that path. We're on the path of, and I tell this story often, you go back to the 1880s, 1890s, you go back to the coal, the robber baron era where the coal barons controlled everything, and you had to go to company stores and use company script, and you could only see the company doctor, and if a loved one was killed in the mine. And this is one of those stories that, it's our history. They would take the miner's broken, bloody body, and they would throw it on the cart with the coal, because they didn't want to make a special trip with the cart, because they didn't want to wear out the donkeys. And they would take it to the surface. The general manager, the boss on the job, would take the body off the coal cart, throw it on the back of a flatbed trailer, and would gallop it to the family's home, where they would take the body and throw it against the door. They didn't even have the courtesy to come and knock on the door. Nope. The bloody, broken bones of their loved ones. That's how they were notified that someone had died. And that was an eviction notice. Or the guy's wife was going to have to sleep with the boss. And if you think I'm kidding, you can look this up. This is our history. This is what happens when the employer class has all of the power. We are moving back to that direction rapidly. This week's 5-4 Supreme Court decision, the fifth vote being that of the guy sitting in the stolen seat, Neil Gorsuch. He wrote for the majority. The case, you can look it up, is Epic Systems versus Morris. It's a consolidation of a couple of cases, but it was a wage theft case. These employers had stolen money from a whole bunch of employees, and they filed a class action suit to get their money back. And thanks to a pro-corporate court, this activist majority on the Supreme Court, Epic Systems is going to allow employers to force their employees under the threat of termination to sign away their constitutional rights to the judiciary and their rights to bring a class action lawsuit against their employers. That's what this is about. This is about taking the power away from the people, taking their access to their courts away, and creating an entirely privatized court where the employers have the rights. So now, as I said at the beginning, it is now open season. Open season on workers, where we're going to be making sexual harassment, gender discrimination, age discrimination, race discrimination, and of course, wage theft great again. It's going to happen. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote in her dissenting opinion that this was an egregious wrong. That in 1992, 2% of employers mandated that employees sign these forced arbitration contracts. She wrote that recently that number has jumped to 54%. And I'm going to tell you right now, in a very short period of time, because of this decision, it's going to hit virtually everyone. Now, the interesting thing for me is, in reading Gorsuch's decision, the guy who's sitting in the stolen seat, he wrote right at the start, asked a couple of questions. Should employees and employers be allowed to agree that any disputes between them will be resolved through one-on-one arbitration? He continues, or should employees always be permitted to bring their claims in class or collective action, no matter what they agreed with their employers? Now, I got to be honest. Are those real questions? Should they be allowed? Yeah, they should. They should be allowed. But should one party be forced under the threat of termination or under the threat of not being hired for a job? Should they be forced to sign them? And this is where this whole thing breaks down. Because the National Labor Relations Act, already exempt, or the Federal Arbitration Act already exempts labor. This is another conservative Supreme Court construct that is taking rights away from workers at really an alarming rate. it's just amazing to me. And I've been saying for some time, we're losing our rights rapidly. And I've been saying for some time, we're moving back toward the days of the Lochner era. And people who have listened to the radio program over the years have heard me talk extensively about, this really horrible, this terrible moment in our nation's history. It was back in 1895, New York passed the New York City Bake Shop Act. And it was, one of these things to protect workers from their employers. And in 1905, the Supreme Court of the United States in Lochner versus New York struck down the New York Bake Shop Act that prohibited owners from forcing their workers to work more than 10 hours a day or more than 60 hours a week. What the Supreme Court decided was that the law was, quote, unreasonable, unnecessary, and arbitrary. It was an interference with the rights and liberty of the individual to contract. And thus, liberty of contract was born. And because of this ruling, this single ruling, for decades, maximum hour laws, child labor laws, minimum wage laws, all struck down. All struck down as unconstitutional and a violation of liberty of contract. And we're hearing the same rhetoric today. I should have the freedom to contract. I should have the freedom to make my own deal. I should have the freedom to do what I want. And, as I always say, you should have the freedom to do whatever you want until what you do infringes on me. So by having a situation where an entire industry is being forced to work 10, 12, 14 hours every day, 6, 7 days a week, that creates an environment where it's just not you being able to do this or being forced to do this. It's now all of us. Back then, Justice Rufus Peckman, writing for the court, said that the law interferes with the right of contract between employer and employees. He continued, adding that there is no contention that these workers were unable to assert their rights and care for themselves without the protecting arms of the state. Understand that it was the protecting arm of the state that was indeed helping these workers to protect themselves from some of the most deplorable working conditions you can imagine. At the time, bakery workers were working on average 13 hours a day, 7 days a week, most weeks in excess of 100 hours, in some of the most deplorable conditions you can imagine. The basements of these rat and roach-infested tenement houses, where raw sewage often covered the workers and often the baked goods. The heat was unbearable. The area was cramped. The conditions were just, deplorable. The flour in the air was, in conjunction with the heat from the ovens, unbearable. And yet, the court struck down the state saying, no, 60 hours is enough. And for the next, like I said, the next couple of decades, what we saw was this decision being what struck down all bits of sanity, all moves towards making sure that people had safe working conditions, that people had good wages and family time. That fight for 8 hours, this was part of it. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for what we will, 8 hours for rest. We're going to fight these fights again. And what this decision has done, is it's going to create an environment where your employer is going to come to you with a piece of paper and they're going to say, sign this or there's the door. And what you will be signing is your rights away to redress your grievances. And what you're saying is, I will go to your court, I will go to your arbitrator, I will go through your system. And back to the Gorsuch question. Should they be allowed to make these deals? Should these agreements be allowed? When I first heard about this several years ago, I thought back to yellow dog contracts, For those who don't know labor history, yellow dog contracts were used by employers to say, you as an employee, you sign on this dotted line stating that you will never join a union, you will never join an association, you will never join a guild or any mutual aid society where you are going to collectively come together with your coworkers to fight for better wages, hours, and conditions. You will never do that. And if you do, this contract will be enforceable and you will be fired. So if you think of the two questions that Gorsuch posed, should they be allowed and should they be enforceable? Personally, I got to tell you, they should not be enforceable. These contracts are not entered into on an even level. Because understand, in today's world, the employer has most of the rights. But you know what they want? They want all the rights. And this decision has moved us one step closer. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you been confronted with one of these forced arbitration contracts? Has your employer come to you and said, hey, sign this or die? Well, not die, but there's the door. I'd love to hear it. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So one of the things I've been talking about quite often is the need for a kind of a new deal. Where do we move forward on infrastructure? Where do we move forward on healthcare and education and workers' rights to organize, and also about jobs? And that's why I've asked Congressman Ro Khanna to come talk with us. He's got a new deal for the 21st century where he's going to help workers cope with some structural unemployment issues, help folks who have suffered job losses due to our bad trade policies, help deal with the AI crisis that is coming, and also help with some of the varied societal barriers that we've got going on. I was here to talk a little bit about his plan. I've asked the Congressman to come talk with us. Congressman, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. Thanks for that summary and introduction.
So how are we going to do this? I think everybody agrees we need to have a robust New Deal kind of program to get people off the sidelines into jobs. How do we go about it?
Well, the first thing is to convince everyone that this is something good. You get it. But FDR, when he gave his famous speech about the four rights, the right to an education, to healthcare, to jobs, talked about jobs not just in the public sector, not just the WPA and civilian corps. He talked about jobs in industry and jobs in farming and jobs in mining. And he understood that the government had a role to help people get work, dignified work that paid well. And we've got a huge challenge in our country. There are those who are doing well, who have the skills or the college degrees or the right background, and they're making out very, very well. But there are a lot of folks who feel left behind. 20 to 25% of jobs may be displaced because of automation and technology and may be transformed. And then we've had these unfair trade deals that have hurt jobs. So my proposal is very simple. It says if someone wants to work, the government should subsidize their wages for up to 18 months and allow them to renew that up to 5 years. They would get a credential or certificate and paid for while they were working, and they'd be able to work, whether that was in the public sector or whether it was as a painter, a drywaller, or an electrician, or a tech data analyst. They would get the skills and dignified work. You know who does this is Germany. They've got cooks make $25 an hour. Service workers often make $10, $12, $15 plus benefits and get skills and credentials. And we can do something similar here.
Yeah, I mean, if other countries can do it, we certainly should be able to. But, you know, we have this fear of government action. And the second you tell someone on the street what you're planning, it's, socialism. We can't do that, Ro. Can't do that here.
Well, that's why I want to make it clear that you can actually get private sector jobs. But this is a market failure. Free market economists, if you believe in the free market, they will tell you that there are people who want to work. They have the aptitude. They have the work ethic. They have a basic high school education often, and they can't find a job. Now, here's the basic question you need to ask yourself. Do you know in your life someone who was hardworking, who wanted a job, who couldn't find a job. My guess is, I certainly know a lot of people like that. My guess is most people know someone like that. And what this is saying is the government has a responsibility to get them started, to get them help in getting a job, in getting the credentials and certification to have a decent career. And that's all we're saying. We're not saying that you're getting some handout from the government. We're not saying that you get to clock in and not do meaningful work. We're saying if someone wants to work, they should have that opportunity.
Now, I've always believed that if the private sector can't or won't create enough jobs, the public sector has to. I mean, everybody should have the right to work. And this is one of those play on words that the right wing has done masterfully, that what they push as right to work has nothing to do with actually having a job and actually having an income.
You're absolutely right. I mean, they have this distorted, they use right to work to beat up on unions. What right to work ought to mean is that you have the right to work, to get a job, and you ought to have the choice. If you want to work in the private sector, you ought to have an opportunity to do that. If you want to work in the public sector, as I've chosen to work, and many people in my team have chosen to work, you ought to do that. And public sector work can be meaningful work. The WPA built downtown San Antonio. Anyone who's been to San Antonio on the Riverwalk area, it's beautiful. They can do things in renewable energy and energy efficiency to make sure that the outdoors are protected and our open spaces are protected. They can do work that has great meaning, but there also can be a lot of good work jobs in the private sector. We need people who are going to understand cloud computing. You don't need a college degree. You don't need to understand coding. You just need to understand basic platforms, which you can get in 9 months of training. We need folks who are going to do drywalling and be electricians and be painters. All of those jobs where you can become an apprentice and then ultimately a journeyman, we ought to give people an economic opportunity to do so by subsidizing some of that employment. Let me give you one statistic which struck me. During the Great Recession, Germany had twice the drop as America in GDP. The Great Recession was twice as severe, and yet their job loss was half of ours. And the reason is because of the Hartz laws in Germany, where they actually subsidize employment and they treat professionally people who don't have a college degree. If Germany can do it with 1/4 of the GDP that we have, then certainly we can do it. It's a matter of priorities. And this is what this comes down to. See, I grew up in Bucks County. I grew up in on a neighborhood where you had engineers and you had executives, and my neighbors also were electricians and nurses and those who installed air conditioning. And we played on the same Little League teams. And we, as a neighborhood, grew up together. And so I grew up believing that what made America strong, what made us unique, was a strong middle class where people earned enough to buy things. That's what drove growth. The Republican belief is that the corporations and investors are what drive growth. I disagree with that. And so if you believe that ordinary Americans are responsible for America's economic success, you would be for this jobs plan.
Yeah, I remember back during the recession, I was saying that we should have been following some of the German plans where they actually cut the number of hours that people were working so that people could stay in jobs, and then they subsidized it with an unemployment compensation kind of thing, knowing that eventually the economy would turn around, those jobs would come back, and you wouldn't have these mass displacements. But, it's weird, though. I can't figure out why we don't think that way in a mass societal way to make sure that our neighbors don't lose their job, too. I mean, it's been curious to me for a while.
And, Rick, here's the thing. We now know what worked, right? It's not even economic theory. I mean, you and I could have been proposing that back in 2008, and some people say, that's subsidized employment, it's not going to work, and we didn't do it. And Germany did it, and now we know the results. Germany's unemployment rate was half of ours, even though the recession was twice as bad. So you would think that you would just look at the data and say, all right, that worked. Next time, let's make sure we are prepared and we do that. But we haven't done that. I mean, one very simple thing for a future recession would be that we should have a financial transaction tax on the speculative activity of Wall Street. I mean, I don't know any person who believes that day trading, where going back and forth on trading, is really productive activity that is helping our nation, helping our community. So we put a small tax on that, and you create a fund that as soon as there's a recession, it goes to states and localities so teachers, firefighters, nurses don't get laid off. So you don't have that massive drop in employment in recessions. And this is an idea that has been proposed, that it's worked in places like Germany, and yet the Congress hasn't acted.
And we used to have a financial transaction tax back in the 60s. We had that. And most of our trades are done by supercomputers, as you know, so it's not even actually people
That's a great point.
We'd be taxing.
That's a great point.
So I want to go back to these.
Go ahead.
Finish up because I wanted to go on to back to a different point.
Well, your supercomputing point is a really important point because it used to be of our GDP, 90% of GDP used to go to people's income. What we thought people make money when they work. And that number has fallen to the high 50s. So 30-some% is now going to capital, to computers, to machinery. And that is the challenge in our country. We ought to be, instead of taxing individual employees as much as we are and putting the burden, what we ought to be doing is taxing capital more and making sure that workers are being paid more. And that's what a financial transaction tax would be. It would really be a tax on capital, not on employees.
No, I say it all the time. We should go back to the tax code of the good socialist president, Dwight David Eisenhower. That could solve a lot of our problems. But I want to talk about the jobs that you're proposing we pursue and what those wages and benefits, would these be, family-sustaining jobs? Are these entry-level jobs? How do you see this? Because, I think anybody can go find a minimum wage job, working at a McDonald's or something like that. There's not really a career path there, and I don't know how you sustain yourself. So I'm curious how you see this working because, I see a tsunami of job losses coming because of automation and technology. What do we do with someone who's in their 40s or 50s, who's been doing these jobs, making a good living, and then all of a sudden they go away? A minimum wage job isn't really going to help them survive. I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, you're absolutely right. And the challenge isn't a jobless future. It's low-income jobs. The fact that people are going to have to work 2 or 3 jobs at a Starbucks or a McDonald's or as an Uber driver to make ends meet. And that's not the future that we want for folks. We want people to have a career. And the challenge, people say, we're moving to a jobless future. No, that's not the case. There were 40 million new jobs created since Windows was introduced in 1993. But those jobs aren't going to middle America or places where folks are in mining or in traditional manufacturing. And so, there are 40 million jobs, but if those jobs aren't accessible to people in other traditional industries, that's a problem. So the question is, well, what can we do to make a meaningful work for people who may not have a college degree, and how do we get them started? And what we need to do, I think, is look at high-growth industries. We know, though, that advanced manufacturing is a high-growth industry. We know construction is going to be a high-growth industry. We know that service work, elder care, and child care are going to be high-growth industries. We know basic technology skills for auto repair, where the digital code in auto parts is going to be a high-growth industry. Basic data management and cybersecurity are going to be high-growth. None of these require more than a year or so or 2 years of credentialing. Some may require an apprenticeship program, but you can get in them with just a high school degree. And we ought to professionalize those jobs, give those jobs the dignity they have. If someone told me, Ro, you're lost your reelection, now go become an electrician or a drywaller, my wife would be the first person to tell you she wouldn't hire me. And it's condescending to folks to think that those aren't skilled, tough jobs that ought to be compensated for the skills that they have. So we need to respect that work, credential that work, and make sure that those jobs are paying. And the jobs plan would give people an opportunity for that type of work.
No, I mean, that's an excellent point. It's something that my grandfather instilled on me. It doesn't matter, what someone does for a living. There's dignity and respect that should go along with that job, whether you're a street sweeper or a surgeon. All work matters, and all work should be respected. You're spot on there. So let me ask you a last line of questioning, because how do we get this from the conception stage to actually implementing it and making people's lives better? Because I've been saying for a long time, Democrats can't just run on, hey, we're not Trump and we're not the Republicans. They got to run on, hey, this is our idea. These are our values. This is what's going to make people's lives better. How do we move this along?
I think we've got to make the argument this is going to make people's lives better in a changing economy, and most folks get it. They get that they need to have a pathway to the middle class in a changing economy for them or their kids. But we also have to make the argument that this is what's going to make our country better. How are we going to compete, Rick, with 1.2 billion people in China if we don't have a strong middle class? And we don't have a person to waste in this country. We need everyone being able to be productive. The constraint on America's economic growth is going to be that people don't have enough money to buy things. You don't have to be a PhD economist to understand that point. Henry Ford got it. That's why he paid people a good wage so they could buy cars. Well, if you have all the money in companies in my district, at Apple and Google and all these tech companies, and you don't have a middle class that's able to buy things and support business, that's going to constrain our economic growth. So what we need to do is make the case that policies that put people to work, that give them an opportunity to work, that give them an opportunity for a fair and decent income is going to actually help our country compete and keep our economic lead.
Good stuff. Congressman, I appreciate you taking time. Best of luck to you, and we need to be pushing behind this and getting folks energized and activated behind pushing this forward. I look forward to talking to you again.
Well, I really appreciate your show because you talk about the real issues, and when I go back to town halls, people are asking me about jobs and income. They're not asking me just about the Stormy Daniels or all the stuff in the news, and I think you're doing progressives and people a real service by focusing on the real issues.
Thanks so much, Ro. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Again, if you want to take a look at where you can see this new deal for the 21st century, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how you can get to Ro Khanna's website. We'll take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. That was the day striking railroad workers in Chicago clashed with police in the Battle of the Halsted Street Viaduct. The Great Railroad Strike had reached the nation's railroad hub and began there 3 days earlier. Switchmen from the Michigan Central traveled to freight shops in yards across the city, calling workers out to strike. Soon, lumber shovers, butchers, and industrial workers joined the strike. By the time the battle began, police had already clashed with unarmed strikers twice. Historian Richard Schneveroff describes the scene leading up to the battle. The city was now preparing itself for a full-scale insurrection, even though violent confrontations were rooted in police attacks on non-violent crowds. Previous confrontations centered in the railroad yards. Now, striker actions spilled over into the neighborhood of Pilsen, where they live. Thousands gathered along Halsted Street between 12th and 16th Streets. The police arrived attempting to disperse the crowd. They chased the strikers south and, as Schneveroff describes, emptied their revolvers into the masses of humanity. The crowd pelted the police with stones in defense and chased them over the viaduct. As word spread of the pitched battle, stockyard workers from nearby Bridgeport walked off the job. They marched along Halsted Street with butcher knives in hand to support the strikers under attack. The crowd on Halsted swelled to more than 10,000 as workers continued to battle police. By evening, 30 workers had been shot dead. Hundreds more were seriously wounded. But the strike continued to spread more fiercely. Streetcar stockmen, stone cutters, gas workers, glass cutters, and others joined the strike. The city was shut down for another week until railroad bosses finally rescinded wage cuts. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.
Brought to you by the Amalgamated Transit Union, the largest labor organization representing 200,000 transit workers in the United States and Canada. The ATU works to promote transit issues and fights for the interests of its hardworking members and riders.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So I got to tell you, I like Ro Khanna's idea of a 21st century New Deal. Looking at the jobs that are coming down the pike, getting job training for people, an education system that encourages people to pursue new technologies and, oh, by the way, retrains folks and helps them get employment. I think it's a good idea. Personally, I'd like to go a lot further. His is more of the what can we get done. I personally think If the private sector cannot or will not create enough jobs, government should be the employer of last resort, especially if you're saying we're not going to let you get food stamps or heating assistance or health care or any of the other things that the Republicans right now are working to tear apart. It's just seems like a step in the right direction. Anyway, some interesting news today that I came across. Walmart. Evidently, Walmart is ditching their mobile scan and go technology. I mean, the great plan was that you would go into the store and you'd pick up your items, you'd scan it yourself, and you'd just scan your credit card, and out the door you would go without ever having to deal with any actual workers. I could have told them that people right now aren't ready for this. This is not popular. In fact, I've never used one of the U-Scan things. I refuse to do it because that's somebody's job. And I think most people, I know there's a lot of people who go, oh, it's not quicker and all that, but I think most people want others to have jobs, and they don't want to be the ones doing free labor for Walmart. So good on them. It's just one of those things that I think really important. I did want to really follow up on the forced arbitration thing, because again, this is one of those things that you've seen coming for years. And I had a relative a couple of years ago who called me out of the blue and said, hey, my employer gave me this. What is it, and should I sign it? Because she'd worked for this company for like 20 years. And it's a mid-sized company, about 70 to 100 employees. And evidently they came in to all of the office workers and said, sign this or there's the door. And she calls me, what should I do? I go, well, you don't have any choice. You sign it or there's the door. Because this is where our Supreme Court has moved us. And now we've made it completely the rule of law. And at the time, what I told her is I said, be very cognizant of what's next. You're an older woman. You're pushing 70. You know that this is the beginning of forcing you out the door. And lo and behold, 3 years later, what did that company do? They literally called her in and said, when are you planning to retire? Because you're too old for our industry. Stop and think about that. And I've been saying that this Supreme Court decision should be a great organizing tool for organized labor to go and say to workers going, hey, do you now see what we've been saying? Do you now see that the balance of power in the employer-employee relationship is swung way to the extreme on the side of the employer? And that only by collectively coming together can you fight back against this kind of stuff. And this is just one example of how much power corporate America, how much power the employer class has over the rest of us. It's really quite remarkable. And I'm hoping that people become as enraged about this theft of our constitutional rights as I am. And I'm hoping that there will be some action. But I would love to hear if anyone has the similar story where your employer came in and said, yep, sign or die. Sign or there's the door. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. Are you concerned about this? Because I tell you, I am. Quick break. Right back after this.
I can't vote for universal background checks.
Or a ban on assault rifles.
Or gun violence restraining orders.
Or a 72-hour waiting period.
I'm not old enough to vote for Kathy Glosson for governor.
But you can. You can.
But you can.
You can.
I need you to.
We say enough is enough.
So how about you?
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Again, one of the things we've been focusing on over the last several weeks, campaign videos like that one, really impressive. The idea that, you've got these young people who are speaking out on the gun issue saying, look, you know what? If I could vote, this is who I'd be voting for because she's right, which is why we've asked Kathy Glosson to come talk with us. She's running for governor there in Iowa. Kathy, thanks for taking time for us.
You bet, Rick. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So again, as I've been seeing these videos, another really good one, and I think a really important one.
Yeah, absolutely. As a candidate running for governor here in the state of Iowa, our campaign came out last November with our beginning of our gun violence and gun reform policy work. And since then, we've had multiple tragedies in schools across this country, which obviously we felt compelled to actually have this conversation and bring it to the forefront on what are we going to do to address it and finally take some action.
Now, Iowa, I would assume, like Pennsylvania, a kind of a gun state, a lot of gun enthusiasts, a lot of, we're passing down from generation to generation, hunting, all of that stuff. So what are you hearing from people in Iowa about this issue?
Well, that's interesting you asked. I was just meeting with a family just yesterday, actually, in a rural part of the state, a smaller community, New Hampton, Iowa. And there was a gun owner sitting with me at the table. He likes to hunt, agrees that we should not have military-style assault rifles out on the streets. They are meant to be used as military weapons, which are used in war. We are not at a time where those sorts of weapons should be on the street or anywhere near our schools, obviously. So, there's huge concern here about the issue. And then with the tragedy just this week, another, lives lost that are so unnecessary, that this conversation is long overdue. And I'm proud to be a Democratic candidate that is leading in this conversation in the state of Iowa and have been since last November.
Now, I think it's important to point out that, gun owners aren't all crazy. I mean, I know some sane, rational gun owners. I mean, I also know some who think, we got to have all these military weapons because we're going to be taking down the government any day now. What is it? The tree of liberty watered with the blood of tyrants and patriots. Those are the kind of people I don't know that I necessarily want to have guns.
Yeah, well, we have to have a conversation, and a rational conversation about this. And, we still have to listen to the concerns of folks. But, it's not that I'm opposed to the Second Amendment rights. That's fine. Having a gun and going hunting and being a responsible gun owner is good. But here's where we come down as a campaign. And I'm the first Democratic candidate in this race to receive the Moms Demand Action Candidate of Distinction for leading, not waiting for other candidates in this race to state their position, but we led on this issue. And that is a ban on assault-style rifles, a 72-hour waiting period, universal background checks, raising the minimum age to gun purchase to age 21. Those are common sense steps forward because, when folks say, oh, that's too much, or we should wait and not do gun reform right now, we're afraid you're going to take our guns away. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about common sense approach to gun reform. And there is nothing radical about being a parent, sending your child to school and expecting them to come home safe at the end of their school day. That's not a radical notion, but that's what we're facing in this country. So we need real leaders.
And it's not partisan either. I mean, that's the other part of it. I think Democrat, Republican, Independent, either fringe. I'm sure they all want their kids to come home. I think that's something, at least I hope that's something we can all agree on.
Yeah, and I would too. And a lot of the things I'm running as a bold progressive Democrat in this race are exactly that, Rick. They are not necessarily partisan, at least in my mind. It's what we need to have a society that works for all of us and that we're safe and we feel economically secure. And that's what this campaign is about. And that's why we've built this grassroots movement that's not a typical campaign.
Let's talk about that. You're the bold progressive and you have a vision. And what I've been saying, look, the Democrats can't just run on, hey, we're not Trump. You got to have a vision. And, this week you were tagged with a good quote, and good on you. You said, I'm tired of centrist Democrats that nibble around the edges and never solve the problem at its core. How do we begin to solve some of the problems of inequality, of lack of health insurance, the retirement crisis that's coming? We've got a lot of problems that aren't being addressed at all right now, and we're coming to the end of the track.
Yeah, and that's the problem is that we have, and look, these are well-intentioned Democrats. They're good people. But at the end of the day, they tend to fold and go to the center on trying to solve major problems. That is not how we're going to solve problems, by establishment, status quo politics as usual. The time for that is over. And when I talk to folks, the time for half measures and incrementalism is over because it hasn't worked in the past and it's not going to work now. So that's why we need, and I think you saw it in some of the other primary elections around the country just a week or so ago, where progressives were winning in states that was sort of surprising, because I think people are sick and tired of getting beat up, and they want real change that's going to improve the lives of them and their families. And that's going to take bold progressive steps, and that's what this campaign has been all about.
No, you're absolutely right. And you hear this all the time because people want to know what you're going to do to make their lives better. And, for me, growing up as a kid in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, the idea of getting a union job made people's lives better immediately. You could see it immediately. They had food at the end of the month. They got a used car. The kids got a used bicycle. I mean, their lives got better, and then eventually they moved out. What I think Democrats have to do is come up with that vision forward. And you look at, wage inequality in this country is a huge problem. The minimum wage is pathetically low, and it's something that needs to be addressed, but not just the minimum. We need to be talking about how to getting everyone's wages to go up. And I argue, again, the ability to join and form unions should be front and center in anything that Democrats do.
That is absolutely correct, and that's why our campaign has made that the center of this campaign. It's increasing the minimum wage. We have 381,000 households here that can't afford to pay their monthly expenses because 2/3 of the jobs here pay less than $20 an hour, and then half of those jobs pay less than $15 an hour. So raising the minimum wage is core to this campaign, but that's only one step to improve the lives of working people in our state. And that is also the union is key to this conversation. We absolutely need to expand and strengthen unions in the state of Iowa. And I'm challenging, and here's where it comes into status quo establishment politics. I'm the only Democratic candidate running for governor in this state that's telling folks that we need to fight to repeal right-to-work laws here. We need to be the first state to go back to making sure that unions are strong, and that's by reversing right-to-work laws that weaken unions and drive down wages and standards. So, and I can't get my Democratic candidates and opponents to step up and say that they'll do that. We need people with guts that are going to stand up to corporations and find new ways to strengthen workers and workers' rights in this state, in this country. And it makes me very proud to be a union leader out front and center talking about this and making it core to a campaign.
And good on you. One of the things I've always said is, I want Democrats who are, if you're in a street fight in the alley, I want somebody who's going to be there beside me, not just saying, hey, I'll hold your coat. Because for too long, it seems there have been a lot of people, I'll hold your coat. You go right on ahead and you fight those battles. We need people who are going to be out there, going to be bold. And, even if you lose, you fight the good fight. Even if you don't get everything you wanted, you still got hopefully something. I mean, this is what the right wing does masterfully. They keep pushing for extreme, and they'll settle for, the death of 1,000 paper cuts, which, especially for labor, we've been seeing over the last 40 plus years.
Yeah, that's right. And so no matter what happens with this campaign, and we obviously are looking forward to a great election on June 5th, but we have changed the debate on the ground here. People understand that unions are good and that they do good things for working people, whether they're in a union or not, whether they come from a union family or not. Again, it's not really a partisan issue. It's an economic bread and butter issue. Do you want to have a better life? And your better life comes through your union. And so it's extremely important that we have bold candidates that are not afraid to come out and push this subject and this issue to the forefront instead of hiding when it comes to the union question. We need more bold candidates running and talking about the union.
I'm with you on that. Let's just talk healthcare for a minute. There's a lot of talk there in D.C. about, hey, we got to repeal the ACA, do away with all that Medicaid expansion. Where are you at with healthcare? I mean, obviously as a governor, you would have enormous amounts of power to help make sure that people had access to insurance. Where do you find yourself? Yeah, well, I'm the only Democratic candidate. Here I go again. But honestly, I'm a different candidate. We're a different campaign. I came out on day one of this campaign supporting Medicare for all on the federal level. That's what I think is the right thing that our country needs to do to cover every American with health care. But I don't think we can count on the politicians in Washington, D.C. to actually get that done under this administration, clearly. So as governor, I am a bold candidate that is pushing for universal single-payer health care, a plan here to cover every Iowan. Do it on a state basis and cover everyone with health care, whether it's mental health, women's reproductive health care,
pharmaceutical costs, and we can do this at a much lower cost than what folks in Iowa are paying in the private insurance market. It's time to finally settle the debate on health care in this country and in this state, and Iowa can lead the way by passing a universal single-payer plan. I'm the only Democratic candidate that came out from day one, and I will continue to fight for this, the universal single payer, because I am a registered nurse and I know the insurance industry will always put profits over patients and people every single time.
No, we've seen that, and the stories are just horrific of how families are fighting to, not end up homeless, not be bankrupt. The healthcare question is such an important one for a lot of families, because as you point out, the insurance rates keep going up and up and up. And oh, by the way, if I can add the aside, they were going up before the ACA and at rates much higher than they did during the years where we were actually pushing the ACA. It's only been since the Republicans have really been trying to kill it that we've seen bigger increases than we should have had.
Yeah, that's right. And just alone in Iowa, the uninsured rate doubled between 2016 and 2017. So you can see the impact that the attack on the Affordable Care Act is having on our state in particular. We're heading down the path where we were before we passed the Affordable Care Act, with more and more millions of people that will become uninsured and costs will be unsustainable. It's time to move to a universal single-payer health care system in this country. And Iowa, as governor, Iowa will lead the way under my as governor of the state of Iowa.
Let's talk education real quick, if you don't mind. We're seeing across the country, we're seeing teachers who are striking in the streets. We're seeing calls for increased funding. You look at places like Arizona and Oklahoma, just some I don't know if you saw the pictures that teachers were tweeting out of the conditions under which they work, and the books and the seats and all this stuff. Just, I can't believe that this is happening in this country. As governor, how do you improve Iowa's situation? How do you move Iowa to the front of the pack?
Well, first of all, the brave and bold, courageous teachers that have stuck their neck out and gone out on strike when it's not necessarily legal or popular, because they care so much about funding their public education system in their states, which is remarkable. And they've been extremely successful. It just goes to show, I think, a lot of us in this country that when you mobilize and organize and you let people lead, they will step up to the plate and they can actually create change, which those teachers have done. Here in Iowa, we've been under our public schools and our teachers have been demonized, and the public schools budget has been starved. I'm coming out bold on a 6% increase in K through 12 funding in the state. And then I clearly have said loudly, I'll veto anything less than a 4% budget increase in our public schools funding, because that's what Iowa used to invest in its public schools. And we had some of the best top-notch education system in the country back then. So we need to get back and invest in the things that we value. And public education is a key one for sure.
Yeah, how do you do that when you give away your tax base? I mean, I look at Arizona, Oklahoma, I look at Kansas, I look at a bunch of these states, and like Pennsylvania had done for a couple of years under Tom Corbett. Fortunately, now Governor Wolf has turned the corner on that. But across the country, the push was for states to gut funding to education and hand it off to big business. How do you turn that dynamic around?
Yeah, well, we do that too here. We give almost $400 to $600 million in tax incentives to corporations like Apple, who are extremely wealthy corporations. So we actually need to take a look at who we're giving our money, our tax dollars to, and why, and then reinvest those into the things that we value, such as public education, healthcare, things that we aren't investing in under a Republican governor that we have now. So that's one way to do it. And when you raise wages and the minimum wage and let unions thrive, those are good jobs that pay well with some benefits, and that helps the state economy grow as well. So there's ways to fund the things we care about. It's just that we have to elect leaders that are going to put their money where their mouth is.
And we need people who have priorities over enriching the already wildly wealthy.
That's right.
Just seems very simple to me. Well, I wish you the best in this campaign. I hope people will check out your website, KathyGlasson.com. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. How can people help you? Last question. How can you need volunteers, money? What? How can people help?
Well, I think anybody that wants to come to Iowa and help out is always welcome here. Absolutely. So We're making phone calls. We've been door knocking. We've been out on the doors. We've been on the phones because we're people-powered grassroots movements from pretty much day one. And that's what made it a great campaign. And we can actually win this. So go to KathyGlosson.com. There's an email that you can email us there if you want to volunteer, share this information with your friends, make a campaign contribution. We got 15 days to go. And, you know, we've had some TV ads up and running, as you had said, Rick, and we could sure use a little hand there. If people are willing to send in a few dollars to help us out, we'd love that too.
Good on you, Kathy. I wish you nothing but the best.
Great. Thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you. Good stuff. Look, and we need people with vision, with bold ideas, and, you know, people who are going to move us forward. I like her a lot. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So one of my favorite tweets of the week, and there have been a bunch of them from Donald Trump. On Wednesday, he tweeted out, "Big legislation will be signed by me shortly. After many years, right to try and big changes to Dodd-Frank." And what they were doing is they've attacked the Dodd-Frank legislation that is pulling back some regulation on the big banks. Now, according to the FDIC, U.S. big banks, mind-blowing to me, the first quarter of this year, $56 billion, smashing the previous record. And understand, the huge tax handouts helped a little bit, but even without the tax handouts, the industry would have made more than $49 billion in net income. A record also, but it's not $56 billion. And what's amazing to me is the big banks, they have recovered. Thank you very much. They're fat and happy again. In fact, they're pushing more deregulation. Question I have is, how are you doing? How's your 401k? How's your investment portfolio? I know myself, I've had a lost decade because of the Wall Street criminals. And what's interesting to me, and I guess kind of ironic, is that the very day that the FDIC comes out and says, hey, these record-breaking numbers the banking industry is pocketing, the people who helped crash our economy in 2008, they're reporting record profits. The very same day that the Republicans in the House of Representatives voted overwhelmingly to gut oversight. And some corporate Democrats are not going to let them off the hook either. So I guess the question is, are we setting ourselves up for the next great crash? Because we did the exact same things during the Bush years. Massive tax cuts for big corporations and the wealthy, gave away all of our tax base, created more debt, credit card growing bigger, debt growing bigger, and then we deregulated. More deregulation, understand, the banks learned their lessons. And that was thanks to Bill Clinton and Phil Tippy Turtle Graham and Leach and Bliley and the rest of the clan who brought us the Financial Services Modernization Act, which destroyed Glass-Steagall, which really set up the great collapse that, of course, Bush did nothing about. And we had no cops on the beat. Nobody was paying attention to all of the complex financial products that eventually tore our economy. The largest, most prosperous economy in the history of civilization, almost to its knees. And we're doing the same thing because it's the same nonsensical message. They've learned their lesson. They won't do it again. Trust us. Sorry, I don't trust you. I don't trust the big banks. I don't trust any of them. But here's the thing that gets me. Even as the FDIC people are reporting $56 billion, a record-breaking revenue quarter, Republicans are still saying onerous, costly regulation, crushing regulations. Is there a way that maybe I can get crushed like that? Is there a way that maybe, I can benefit from those kind of egregious violations that are just crushing my soul, that I can have a record-breaking quarter? It's amazing stuff to me. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think, what you know. I'm shocked. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week.